Georgia speaks the truth. Wow. We're glad this morning to have some friends back with us, the Pounds family, John, Mary, Lindsay, and they're here this morning, back from Georgia. So welcome home, guys. Good to see you. All right. And a lot of our hearts are touched this morning to look over on this side and to see Bailey McIntyre, one of our prayer concerns for, she was born a little early and was in the hospital a good while, and we're so delighted she's here this morning with her parents as well. Amen. Let me read to us from some well-known words out of the Gospel of Matthew. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem, and they asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." Now when King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. "In Bethlehem, in Judea," they replied. "This is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. And as soon as you find him, report to me, that I too may go and worship him." The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. It's the one thing you can't find in any store or catalog or even on any online website. Amazon can't bring it to you, and if you ask Alexa for it, she'll just play a few chimes and tell you to chill out. For in fact, even with all of our technology, we're still not much better off than the great poet of the Middle Ages, Dante, decided to walk to Paris from Italy when he was exiled from his home in Florence. After several days, he found himself rather weary and exhausted, and so he stopped at a monastery to find refuge for the night. Everyone was asleep as he knocked on the door, until finally a somewhat surly monk came. He flung the door open, and in a gruff voice he asked, "What do you want?" Dante answered in a single word, saying simply, "Peace." That's indeed what so many today are searching for this morning, I think. But again, it's pretty hard to find sometimes in life. I think of an enthusiastic group of 1,200 would-be peacemakers who began a peace march in Los Angeles some years ago to make a statement about the futility of war. But before they got very far, the march stalled out as about half the protesters disbanded because of some petty bickering in the group. Then the remaining marchers quickly polarized between those who were walkers and those who rode in vehicles. They had a dispute over a dress code as well, until they finally decided to settle their conflict with an election. But then they disagreed over whether the children in the group should be able to vote or not. They finally let them do that, but that led to a challenge as to whether the election was a valid one or not. This wasn't even in Florida. The march soon ended with a large percentage of those who had assembled refusing to even speak to each other. To which one commentator simply observed, "And we wonder why nations cannot get along." And yet at Christmas, we think that somehow it should be different, don't we? What was this song that the angels sang to the shepherds in the field that night? Peace on earth, goodwill towards all. What was the great messianic hope of Israel that Isaiah had described centuries before Jesus was born? The wolf will lie down with the lamb, the leopard will lie down with the goat, the calf and the lion and the yearling together, and a little child will lead them. But that's not exactly what happened, is it? You see, Jesus was born in Bethlehem, and those wise men, those magi, philosophers and astronomers, came to Jerusalem inquiring as to where the child was, at least according to Matthew 2:3. When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed or troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. I bet they were indeed. Herod the Great was a pretty terrible ruler in that conquered Roman province of Judea. He was brave. He was skilled in war. That's why he was appointed to that post by the Roman Senate. He knew how to put down a rebellion. He was more than comfortable enforcing Roman laws and collecting Roman taxes. He was learned, incredibly creative. His architectural visions were astounding. The palaces he built were over the top. One of them even literally over the top of the Mediterranean. It was a floating palace in Caesarea. He was also paranoid and at best unstable. The Jews didn't like him because he was an Idumean, what folks centuries before had called Edomites, named for that other son of Isaac, the brother of Jacob, Esau. That made Herod only a half Jew in their minds. So even when Herod rebuilt the temple in Jerusalem, grander and bigger and better than Solomon even had made it, it didn't change how people felt about him. See, more than just the problem of being an Idumean, of being an outsider, Herod was a ruthless and paranoid ruler. He used secret police to monitor and report how the citizens of his country felt about him. He prohibited protest. He had a personal bodyguard of 2,000 soldiers. He destroyed the entire family of the Hasmoneans, who had ruled Israel for 80 years before the Romans came along, including his dearly beloved wife, Mariamne, who came from the Hasmonean clan, and the two sons she had born to Herod, Aristobulus and Alexander. He suspected them of plotting against him. And so he brought them up on treason charges before Caesar. They were put to death by strangulation. But they weren't the only ones. Herod's firstborn son, Antipater, by his first wife, was also executed on charges of plotting against his father. Led the Emperor Augustus in far-off Rome to quip, "It is better to be Herod's pig than Herod's son." The joke being that Herod wouldn't eat pork, so the pig at least was safe. Fearing that he wouldn't be mourned when he died, Josephus tells us Herod commanded that a large group of prominent men should be brought to Jericho, and he gave an order that they should be killed at the moment of his own death, so that there would be displays of grief in the country. Fortunately, his other son Archelaus and his sister Salome didn't carry out that wish. But all in all, it's no surprise then, is it, that when Herod was disturbed, all of Jerusalem was disturbed with him. Matthew uses the word eterachte. It comes from the verb terasso. That means to stir up something, to set in motion all kinds of emotional agitation. The disciples, for instance, were disturbed or terrified when they saw Jesus walking on the water. Zechariah was disturbed or startled when he encountered an angel in the temple. Even Jesus was disturbed or troubled when Judas went to betray him following the Last Supper. And just the idea of the birth of a baby whom some said would one day, long after Herod would have died, would one day be the king of the Jews. That was enough to trouble Herod. So to paraphrase an old country saying, if mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. Herod summoned all the chief priests, the archieros, the hierarchy. He summoned all the teachers of the law, the grammates, the scribes, the lawyers. He asked them where the prophets had said the Messiah would be born. And they all knew, everybody did, everybody but Herod and those foreign philosophers. Centuries before, Micah had told them it would be out of tiny Bethlehem, a place not big enough to raise a whole fighting unit of men. But out of Bethlehem, a ruler would come who would shepherd Israel. And wouldn't you know it? Bethlehem lay just 6 miles south of Jerusalem, only 3 miles from the country fortress palace Herod had built, modestly called the Herodium. So Herod enlisted the wise men to find out more. Herod was troubled by this news. That a lot of people are still troubled by Jesus, aren't they? That's sort of the thing about being a king, about having a king, which is that if somebody else is the king, you can't be. It is to say, if someone is truly the ruler of your life, you have to surrender to them and let them rule. And so if you say you follow Jesus, then sorry, you have to act like it now. You can't cut people off in traffic or in conversation. You can't sever diplomatic relations with them if they offend you. That's not your call to make. You can't decide what you think is moral or right or wrong and ignore what the king has already told you in those regards. That's well above your pay grade, and mine for that matter. You can't even decide who to love and who to hate, because the king has already told us you have to love everybody. And Herod, he could never understand that, because in the end, Herod only loved himself. But if that maniacal monarch had only bothered to read Micah for himself, he would have seen it. The prophet not only said that out of Bethlehem would come one who would be a ruler over Israel one day, he went on to describe that individual as one who will stand and shepherd his flock in the strength of the Lord, so that all may live securely, for he will be our peace. And for all of his riches and all of his power, that's what Herod didn't have. He didn't have peace. See, in the end, peace is a gift of God. Gordon MacDonald, one of my professors in seminary, once told of meeting a Nigerian woman who came out of the crowd one day to say something kind about some words MacDonald had just given. She introduced herself using her Western name, American name. So Gordon asked her, "What's your African name?" And when she told him, it was several syllables long with a kind of a musical sound to it. So he said, "What does that name mean?" She said, "It means child who takes the anger all away." So Gordon went a little further. He inquired why she would have been given this name. Her answer was, my parents had been forbidden by their parents to marry. But they loved each other so much they defied the families. They married anyway. For several years, they were ostracized from both of their families. Then my mother became pregnant with me. And when the grandparents held me in their arms for the first time, the walls of hostility came down. I became the one who swept the anger away. So that's the name my father and my mother gave me. As Gordon observed, wouldn't that be a suitable name for Jesus as well? The child who takes the anger away. In the same way that this woman as an infant brought so much love into a family that old grudges, old animosities wasted away, so the Christ child brought love into human society, enough love so that each of us lived in that love, all anger and all hatred in our world would quickly drain away as well. See, we really do have the capacity, you and I, to change this world if we simply bring to it the simple gift of God's peace. If ever the world needed it, it's now, isn't it? It's not just tensions between nations, between political parties, even differing groups within the church. It's evident in our families and in our everyday encounters, the ones you and I have. Lucinda Norman describes Christmas shopping at a busy mall that was far from a peaceful experience. People had been pushing and elbowing and cutting in front of her all day. During a 10-minute special, which featured a 10% discount off of the already 25% discount, a woman actually grabbed a lace tablecloth from her hands. Lucinda looked her straight in the eye and grunted, "Mine," and she yanked it back. She won. But by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, her mood was pretty belligerent. So when she went into a restaurant to meet some friends, she flagged down a server and said, "I need hot tea now." The server snapped at her and said, "You're not in my section. Wait your turn." Lucinda shot back and she said, "Lady, I've been waiting my turn all day. Bring me some tea." But the waitress ignored her and walked off. A few minutes later, a friendly young man came to her table, smiling and said, "Hi, I'm Rob. I'm your waiter." After he took her order, she noticed that Rob stopped to help the rude waitress with her tray. He greeted the other customers and staff. In the midst of dozens of hurried shoppers and restaurant staff, he conducted himself in a polite, unhurried atmosphere of calm. And when he refilled her tea, Lucinda noticed a silver ring on his right hand made of connected letters. After he walked away, she said to the other ladies at the table, "Did you notice that our server is wearing a ring that spells Jesus?" That's why this young man has such a unique spirit about him. From that moment on, Lucinda's attitude changed. That one young man's example reminded her of the peace that Christ came to bring. This young man had spent time with the Lord. For the rest of the day, Lucinda enjoyed shopping. She opened the door for other people. She let people go in front of her at the checkout line, all in an atmosphere of calm. That's what Jesus does when he comes into our lives. He takes away the anger. He takes away the fear. He takes away the selfishness. He takes away the greed. In short, Jesus brings us what we've all been looking for this season, whether we've realized it or not. Jesus brings us peace. Herod never did understand it. When the wise men didn't come back, he went so far in his paranoia to order the murder of every male baby under the age of 2 his soldiers could find in Bethlehem. But within 2 years, Herod himself was dead, buried in a fancy grave at the Herodium, a tomb that, ironically enough, was lost for centuries afterwards until it was finally rediscovered just 10 years ago. And when Herod died, this time, all of Jerusalem breathed a sigh of relief, I suspect. On the other hand, those wise men from the east who came looking for meaning in their lives, which they'd never known, discovered precisely that when they got to Bethlehem and they found the child. For Matthew tells us they were overjoyed, rejoiced with a joy great exceeding, literally. And they bowed down, literally, they kissed the ground, proskuneo. They bowed down and they worshiped him. It strikes me this morning, you and I, we have the same option. We can respond as Herod did, clawing, grabbing, paranoid, and angry, holding on to everything you can, no matter what it cost. Or you and I, we can go find the Christ child, fall down on our knees, as those foreign visitors did so long ago. More than a century and a half ago, in the midst of revolutions in Europe and an American war with Mexico, suffering a personal breakdown in his own life, a pastor named Edmund Sears rediscovered that for himself. We sang it just a little while ago. Came upon the midnight clear, that glorious song of old, from angels bending near the earth to touch their harps of gold. Peace on the earth, goodwill to all, from heaven's all gracious King. The world in solemn stillness lay to hear the angels sing. And then the last verse of that, for lo, the days are hastening on, by prophesying of old, when with the ever-circling years shall come the time foretold, when peace shall over all the earth its ancient splendors gleam, and the whole world send back the song which now the angels sing. So may the gift of peace be yours this morning.